The steamboat's whistle pierced the morning air like a widow's cry, and Rose Zimmerman clutched her carpetbag tighter as she descended the weathered gangplank onto the dock at Eldorado Canyon, Nevada territory, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. The September sun of 1876 beat down mercilessly on the small settlement that clung to the banks of the Colorado River, and she had exactly $7 to her name, no family waiting, and a husband who had died of cholera 3 days into their journey west, leaving her with nothing but debts and broken promises. The other passengers pushed past her, eager to reach their destinations, but Rose stood frozen on the dock, her black mourning dress already collecting dust from the dry wind that swept up from the canyon. She was 22 years old and utterly alone in a world that had little patience for women without protection or prospects. Her late husband Thomas had promised her a new life in California, a fresh start away from the suffocating expectations of Boston society. But instead, she found herself stranded in a rough mining town with barely enough money for a single night's lodging. "You cannot stay here, miss," a gruff voice said behind her. She turned to see the boat's captain, his weathered face impatient. "We are pushing off in 10 minutes." Rose nodded mutely and forced her feet to move forward, carrying her single bag toward the dusty street that seemed to be the town's main thoroughfare. Rough wooden buildings lined both sides, their false fronts giving an illusion of substance to what were mostly canvas-backed structures. Saloons, a general store, a blacksmith, and various other establishments competed for space in the narrow canyon. The sound of hammers on rock echoed from the surrounding hills where miners worked their claims, and the air tasted of minerals and desperate hope. She walked slowly, trying to look purposeful even though she had no destination in mind. Men stopped to stare at her, and she felt their eyes like brands on her skin. A proper woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but a young widow with no escort was practically an invitation for trouble. She kept her gaze straight ahead and her chin up, a posture her mother had drilled into her since childhood, even as her heart hammered with fear. The general store seemed like the safest option, so Rose pushed through the door, grateful for the relative coolness inside. The proprietor, a balding man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested he would rather not. "I am looking for lodging," Rose said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is there a respectable boarding house in town?" the man snorted. "Respectable? Lady, this is a mining camp, not San Francisco. There is the Silver Star Hotel, but I would not call it respectable exactly. Mrs. Fletcher runs it, though, so it is as safe as you will find." "Thank you," Rose said. "And where might I find employment?" "I can read and write, I have experience with bookkeeping, and I can sew and cook." The proprietor's expression softened slightly. "You a widow, recently," Rose admitted. "My husband passed on the journey here." "That is hard luck," he said, and he seemed to mean it. "There is not much call for bookkeeping here, and the miners do their own cooking, such as it is. You might ask Mrs. Fletcher if she needs help at the hotel. Sometimes the saloons hire women, but that is not the kind of work a lady like you would want." Rose felt her stomach drop. She knew what kind of work he meant, and he was right. It was not something she could consider, not yet, not unless things became truly desperate. "Thank you for your help," she said quietly. The Silver Star Hotel was 3 buildings down, a 2-story structure that looked marginally more solid than its neighbors. Rose climbed the steps to the porch and went inside, finding herself in a small lobby with a desk and a few chairs. A woman in her 50s emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Help you?" she asked. "Mrs. Fletcher. I need a room, and I was hoping you might have work available. I am willing to do anything respectable, cleaning, cooking, mending, whatever you need. Mrs. Fletcher studied her with sharp but not unkind eyes. You are the widow from the boat. Word travels fast in a town this size. I heard your husband died on the way here. Rose nodded, not trusting her voice. She had not allowed herself to grieve properly. There had been no time, and she could not afford to break down now. I can give you a room for $1 a week if you help with the cleaning and cooking, Mrs. Fletcher said after a moment. It is not much, but it is honest work and you will have a roof over your head. The room is small, but it has a lock on the door. Relief flooded through Rose so suddenly that she felt dizzy. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet, Mrs. Fletcher said with a tired smile. It is hard work, and the guests are not always pleasant, but you look like you have some backbone and I need the help. My husband died last year, and I have been running this place alone. Rose paid for her first week and followed Mrs. Fletcher upstairs to a tiny room barely big enough for a narrow bed and a washstand. But it was clean, and there was a window that looked out over the canyon, and it was hers. She set down her bag and sat on the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks. She had married Thomas in a hasty ceremony, swept up by his enthusiasm and promises of adventure. Her parents had disapproved, but Rose had been eager to escape their rigid world, to see something beyond the narrow confines of proper Boston society. Thomas had been charming and reckless, and she had mistaken his wild optimism for strength. The reality had been different. He had gambled away most of their money before they even left St. Louis, and then the cholera had struck, and she had watched him die in agony in a cramped cabin, surrounded by strangers. She should cry, she thought. She should mourn, but the tears would not come. She felt numb and exhausted and terrified of what the future might hold. A knock on the door startled her. "Dinner is in an hour," Mrs. Fletcher called. "Come down to the kitchen when you are ready, and I will show you the ropes." Rose washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into an older dress that was more suitable for work, and went downstairs. Mrs. Fletcher put her to work immediately, peeling potatoes and setting the table in the small dining room where the hotel guests took their meals. There were only 5 guests staying that night, all men, all miners or prospectors, and they eyed Rose with curiosity but kept their comments respectful in Mrs. Fletcher's presence. After dinner, Rose helped wash dishes and prepare the rooms for the next day. By the time she climbed the stairs to her little room, every muscle in her body ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from honest work. She fell asleep almost instantly and did not dream. The days settled into a routine. Rose woke before dawn, helped prepare breakfast, cleaned rooms, washed linens, prepared lunch and dinner, and fell into bed exhausted each night. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in Boston, but there was a satisfaction in it, a purpose that had been missing from her previous life of social calls and needlepoint. Mrs. Fletcher was a fair employer, though not a warm one. She taught Rose the practical skills of running a frontier hotel, how to stretch supplies, how to deal with difficult guests, how to keep things clean in a town that seemed determined to stay dusty. Rose learned fast, driven by the need to prove her worth and secure her position. It was on her 10th day in Eldorado Canyon that she first saw him. She was hanging laundry in the yard behind the hotel, struggling with a heavy wet sheet in the wind, when a man on horseback rode past and stopped. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the sky just before sunset. His clothes were dusty from travel, but they were good quality, and he sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who spent most of his life in the saddle. "Need help with that?" he asked, and his voice was deep and rough like gravel shifting in a stream. I can manage, Rose said, finally getting the sheet pinned to the line. Thank you. He nodded and seemed about to ride on, then stopped again. You are new here. It was a statement, not a question. Rose felt a flutter of nervousness. I arrived about 10 days ago. Alone. That is none of your concern, Rose said, more sharply than she intended. She had learned quickly that showing weakness in a town like this was dangerous. The man held up a hand. I meant no offense. Name is Asher Harding. I have a small ranch about 5 miles east of here. I come into town for supplies now and then. Rose Zimmerman, she said reluctantly. I work here at the hotel. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Zimmerman. He tipped his hat and rode on, but Rose felt his gaze linger, and something in her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. That evening, as she was serving dinner, Asher Harding came into the dining room and took a seat at the table. Mrs. Fletcher raised an eyebrow when she saw him. Asher Harding, as I live and breathe, she said. What brings you to my establishment? You usually camp out by the livery when you come to town. Thought I would treat myself to a decent meal for once, he said with a slight smile. If that is all right with you, Margaret. Your money is as good as anyone's, Mrs. Fletcher said. She seemed genuinely pleased to see him, which was unusual. Most of the guests barely rated a civil word from her. Rose served him quietly, aware of his eyes following her movements. She felt self-conscious in a way she had not since she first arrived, suddenly aware of her worn dress and the strands of hair escaping her bun. After dinner, as she was clearing the dishes, Asher stopped her. Mrs. Zimmerman, I hope I did not offend you earlier. I have been alone on the range too long, I forget my manners sometimes. You did not offend me, Mr. Harding, Rose said. I am simply cautious. A woman alone has to be. That is wise, he said. This is a rough town. But if you ever need help, real help, my ranch is 5 miles east along the canyon road. The Broken Arrow Ranch, anyone can point you in the right direction. Thank you, Rose said, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. That is very kind. He left soon after, and Rose found herself thinking about him as she finished her work. There had been something different about him, something that set him apart from the other men in town. A quietness, a sense of solitude that matched her own. Mrs. Fletcher noticed her distraction. Asher Harding is a good man, she said as they cleaned the kitchen. One of the few around here worth knowing. He came out here about 5 years ago, bought a piece of land nobody else wanted, and built it into something real. He is lonely, I think. Lost his family back east, from what I hear, though he does not talk about it. I was not asking, Rose said, but she could feel the heat in her cheeks. You did not have to, Mrs. Fletcher said with a knowing look. Just be careful, Rose. A man like that, a good man in a hard place, he could break your heart as easily as mend it. Rose thought about that warning as she lay in bed that night. She had no business thinking about Asher Harding or any man. Her husband had been dead less than a month. She should still be in mourning, grieving properly. But the truth was, she had not loved Thomas, not really. She had loved the idea of escape, of adventure, but not the man himself. And now she was here, alone and starting over, and she did not know what she was supposed to feel. The next week passed without incident. Rose fell deeper into the rhythm of the hotel, and she began to feel almost settled, if not quite at home. She was making enough to cover her board and have a little left over, and Mrs. Fletcher seemed pleased with her work. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was hers, and there was something valuable in that. Then Asher Harding came back to town. She saw him first at the general store, buying supplies. He greeted her politely and asked how she was settling in. She answered briefly, aware of the store owner and other customers watching with interest. In a town this small, Any interaction between a young widow and an unmarried man was fodder for gossip. But that evening he came to the hotel again for dinner, and this time he lingered afterward, nursing a cup of coffee in the now empty dining room while Rose cleaned. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said finally, "may I speak plainly with you?" Rose paused, holding a stack of plates. "I suppose so." "I find myself thinking about you," he said, his eyes direct. "I know that is forward, and I know you are recently widowed, and I do not mean any disrespect to your late husband. But I wanted you to know that if you ever need anything, anything at all, I am willing to help. No strings, no expectations. Just, I know what it is like to be alone in a place like this, and I would not want you to feel you have no one to turn to." Rose set down the plates carefully, her hands suddenly shaking. "Why?" she asked. "You do not know me." "No," he agreed. "But I recognize something in you. A kind of I do not know determination, I guess. You remind me of my mother. She was a strong woman, raised me and my brothers after my father died. She never gave up, no matter how hard things got." "What happened to her?" Rose asked softly. "Fever took her about 6 years ago," Asher said. "My brothers too. I was the only one who survived. That is when I came out here. Could not stand being in that empty house anymore, surrounded by ghosts." Rose felt a sudden kinship with this quiet man. They were both running from something, both trying to build new lives from the wreckage of old ones. "I am sorry for your loss," she said. "And thank you for your offer. It means more than you know." He nodded, finished his coffee, and left. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible connection had been forged, and Rose found herself looking forward to his next visit with an anticipation that both excited and frightened her. Over the following weeks, Asher Harding became a regular presence at the hotel. He came to town every few days, always with some errand or another, and he always ate dinner at the Silver Star. He and Rose fell into a pattern of conversation, brief exchanges that gradually grew longer and more personal. She learned that he was 27 years old, that he had grown up on a farm in Missouri, that he loved the land but found ranching harder and lonelier than he had expected. He learned that she was from Boston, that she had been educated at a good school, that she had married in haste and regretted it, though she tried to speak kindly of Thomas despite everything. Mrs. Fletcher watched their growing friendship with a mixture of approval and concern. "He is a good man, Rose," she said one evening, "but make sure you are ready before you let him get too close. You have been through a lot." "I know," Rose said. "I am not looking for anything, truly. I enjoy talking to him." "That is how it starts," Mrs. Fletcher said with a smile. "That is how it should start." One crisp October afternoon, Asher appeared at the hotel during the day, which was unusual. Rose was in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for the evening meal when Mrs. Fletcher called her. "Rose, Asher is here asking for you, says he wants to show you something." "I told him you have work to do, but he says it is important." Rose wiped her hands on her apron and went to the lobby, where Asher stood hat in hand, looking oddly nervous. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, "I know this is forward, but I was wondering if you might come out to my ranch. I have something I would like your opinion on, and it is a beautiful day for a ride. Mrs. Fletcher said she could spare you for a few hours if you are willing." Rose glanced at Mrs. Fletcher, who nodded slightly. "Go on," she said. "You have been working hard. You deserve an afternoon off." Rose hesitated. It would not be entirely proper to go alone with him to his ranch, but then again, very little about her current situation was proper. And she found that she wanted to see his home, to understand more about this man who had become such an unexpected presence in her life. "All right," she said. "Let me get my shawl." Asher had brought a gentle mare for her to ride, and they set off together along the canyon road. The landscape was stark but beautiful, red rock cliffs rising on either side, the river glinting silver in the distance. Asher rode easily beside her, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. "It is hard country," he said, "but there is a freedom here I never felt back east. You can see for miles, and nobody is looking over your shoulder telling you how to live." "That must be nice," Rose said. "I always felt like I was suffocating in Boston. There were so many rules, so many expectations." "Is that why you married your husband?" Asher asked gently. "To escape, partly," Rose admitted. "That, and I think I wanted to believe in something. He was so full of plans and dreams. It seemed exciting. And now I am making my own plans," Rose said. "Smaller ones, perhaps, but they are mine." The Broken Arrow Ranch appeared gradually, a sturdy cabin with a barn and several corrals. It was modest but well kept, and Rose could see the care that had gone into building it. Asher helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The cabin was simple: one main room with a sleeping area partitioned off, a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, and not much else. But it was clean and orderly, and there was something appealing about its plainness. "It is not much," Asher said, suddenly self-conscious, "but it is home." "It is lovely," Rose said honestly. "You built all this yourself, most of it," he said. "Had some help with the barn, but I wanted to ask your opinion on something." He led her to the far wall, where there was an empty space. "I have been thinking about building some shelves here for books. I do not have many now, but I would like to collect more. I was wondering if you thought it was a good spot, or if there is somewhere better." Rose realized with a start that he had not brought her here just to see his ranch. He had brought her here to ask her opinion, to involve her in his plans, to show her that he valued what she thought. It was such a small thing, but it touched her deeply. "I think that would be perfect," she said. "The light is good here during the day. You could read comfortably by the window." They talked about books for a while, discovering a shared love of literature that surprised them both. Asher made coffee and they sat at his table, and for a little while, Rose forgot about the hardship of the past months, forgot about her uncertain future, and simply enjoyed the moment. As the sun began to lower, Asher rode back to town with her. At the hotel, he helped her dismount and their hands touched briefly. Rose felt a jolt of something electric, something she had never felt with Thomas. "Thank you for coming today," Asher said. "It meant a lot to me." "Thank you for inviting me," Rose said. "I had a wonderful time." That night, as she lay in bed, Rose admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Asher Harding. It was too soon, it was improper, it was reckless, but it was happening anyway, as inevitable as the sunrise. Over the next several weeks, Asher and Rose saw each other as often as his work allowed. They went on rides together, exploring the canyons and mesas around the town. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering each other's thoughts and dreams. Asher was unlike any man Rose had ever known, thoughtful and steady and deeply kind. He listened to her in a way Thomas never had, truly hearing what she said and caring about her opinions. For his part, Asher was clearly smitten. He looked at Rose with an intensity that made her breath catch, and he found excuses to be near her whenever possible. But he was always respectful, always careful not to push too fast or make her uncomfortable. He understood that she was still healing, still finding her footing in this new life. By November, the weather had turned cold and Rose had been in Eldorado Canyon for 3 months. She had proven herself invaluable to Mrs. Fletcher, and her position at the hotel was secure. She had saved a little money, and she was beginning to feel less like a desperate refugee and more like a woman with a future. One evening, Asher came to the hotel looking troubled. Rose was serving dinner, and she noticed immediately that something was wrong. After the meal, he asked if they could talk privately. Mrs. Fletcher gave them the use of her small sitting room, and they sat together by the fire. "What is wrong?" Rose asked. Asher took a deep breath. "Rose, I need to tell you something, and I am afraid of how you will react." Rose felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I have been for weeks now, maybe since the first day I saw you struggling with that laundry. I know it is too soon. I know you are still in mourning, and I know I have no right to say any of this. But I cannot keep it to myself any longer. I think about you every moment of every day. When I am working on the ranch, I imagine you there with me. When I read at night, I wish you were there to share it. I want to build a life with you, Rose. I want to give you a home and a future and everything you deserve." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. "Asher, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything right now," he said quickly. "I am not asking for an answer. I just needed you to know. But Rose, please do not shut me out because you think it is too soon or improper. I know your marriage was not what you hoped for. I know you are still healing. But I also think, I hope, that you feel something for me too." "I do," Rose whispered. "I do feel something for you. I think I am falling in love with you too. But Asher, I am frightened. Everything happened so fast with Thomas, and it all went so wrong. What if we are making a mistake?" "We might be," Asher said honestly. "There are no guarantees in life, Rose. I learned that when I lost my family. But I also learned that when you find something good, something real, you hold on to it. You do not let fear keep you from living." Rose looked into his eyes and saw everything she had been searching for: steadiness, honesty, strength tempered with gentleness. This was nothing like the wild infatuation she had felt for Thomas. This was deeper, calmer, more real. "I need time," she said finally. "Not to decide how I feel, I think I already know that, but to make sure I am doing this for the right reasons, to make sure I am ready." "Take all the time you need," Asher said. "I am not going anywhere." The winter months were hard in Eldorado Canyon. The wind howled through the canyon walls, and snow occasionally dusted the red rocks. The hotel was quieter as fewer travelers braved the weather, but Rose and Mrs. Fletcher stayed busy with the regular boarders and the occasional prospector seeking shelter from the cold. Asher came to town less frequently, as ranch work kept him busy, and the weather made the trip more difficult. But he wrote letters, simple notes about his days and thoughts, and Rose treasured them. She wrote back, her own letters growing longer and more personal as the weeks passed. By the time spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and wildflowers to the canyon, Rose knew what her answer would be. She had spent the winter thinking, healing, and growing stronger. She had saved enough money to feel secure. And most importantly, she had realized that her love for Asher was not born of desperation or the need for rescue. It was real and deep and true, built on friendship and respect and a genuine connection of souls. On a warm April morning, Asher rode into town and came straight to the hotel. He looked nervous, his hat twisting in his hands. "Rose," he said, "I know I said I would give you time, and I meant it. But I cannot wait any longer to ask. Will you marry me? Will you come to the ranch and build a life with me? I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy." Rose smiled, feeling a joy so pure it almost hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Asher, I will marry you." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around right there in the hotel lobby. Mrs. Fletcher came rushing out of the kitchen at the commotion, then broke into a wide smile when she saw them. "About time," she said. "I was wondering how long you two were going to dance around each other." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Mrs. Fletcher stood with Rose, and the local blacksmith stood with Asher. Rose wore a new dress, pale blue instead of black, and she felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. This time, she was marrying with her eyes wide open, with full knowledge of herself and the man she was joining her life to. The reception was held at the hotel, and it seemed like the whole town turned out to celebrate. Rose was touched by how many people had become friends over the past months, people who had welcomed her and given her a chance to prove herself. That evening, Asher took her home to the Broken Arrow Ranch. He had spent weeks preparing, cleaning, and fixing things, adding small touches he thought she would like. There were curtains on the windows, flowers in a jar on the table, and books on the new shelves he had built. "Welcome home," he said, and Rose felt tears of happiness on her cheeks. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness that took Rose's breath away. Asher was patient and gentle, so different from Thomas's rough impatience. He made her feel cherished and desired and beautiful, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Rose felt a peace she had never known before. Life on the ranch was hard work, but Rose threw herself into it with enthusiasm. She learned to tend chickens and plant a garden, to preserve food and mend fences. Asher taught her to ride better, and they would spend evenings riding out to watch the sunset over the canyon. They talked and laughed and worked side by side, building their life together one day at a time. Mrs. Fletcher came to visit occasionally, always pleased to see how happy Rose had become. "You have bloomed out here," she told Rose one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas, "like a flower that just needed the right soil." "I did not know I could be this happy," Rose admitted. "After Thomas died, after everything that happened, I thought maybe I was not meant for this kind of life." "You were always meant for it," Mrs. Fletcher said. "You just had to find the right person to share it with." By late summer, Rose realized she was pregnant. She told Asher one evening after dinner, nervous about how he would react. His face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Rose, that is the best news I have ever heard." He was attentive and protective throughout her pregnancy, insisting she rest more and do less heavy work. Rose grumbled about being coddled but secretly loved his concern. They spent the winter preparing, building a cradle and sewing tiny clothes, talking about names and futures. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1878, with Mrs. Fletcher acting as midwife. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rose was frightened, but Asher stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When she finally held their baby in her arms, Rose felt a love so fierce it almost frightened her. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's eyes, and they named him James after Asher's father. Asher proved to be a devoted father, always eager to hold his son, to sing to him, to watch him sleep. Rose would often find him in the rocking chair by the fire, James cradled against his chest, both of them peaceful and content. The years that followed were filled with hard work and simple joys. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily, and they added more cattle, expanded the barn, and improved the house. James grew into a lively, curious boy, always underfoot and full of questions. When James was 3, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. She was quieter than her brother, with Rose's auburn hair and a thoughtful disposition. 2 years later, another son arrived, Robert, who was all energy and mischief from the start. The house that had once seemed too big for just Asher now rang with children's laughter. Meals were chaotic and bedtimes were battles, but Rose would not have changed anything. This was the life she had dreamed of without knowing it, messy and real and full of love. Eldorado Canyon changed over the years. The silver mines played out, and many people moved on, but a core community remained. People who had put down roots and were determined to build something lasting. The town got a proper school, and Rose volunteered as a teacher, putting her education to good use. Asher served on the town council, respected for his fairness and good judgment. Mrs. Fletcher grew older but remained sharp as ever. She eventually sold the hotel and built a small house near the ranch, insisting she was not getting soft, but just wanted to be near her adopted family. She became a beloved grandmother figure to the children, always ready with stories and sweets. On their 10th anniversary, Asher surprised Rose with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Mrs. Fletcher and spent a week exploring the city, going to theaters and restaurants, walking along the waterfront. It was exciting and fun, but Rose found herself eager to return home. San Francisco was impressive, but it was not where her heart was. "I never thought I would be happy in a place like this," Rose told Asher on their last night in the city, as they stood on their hotel balcony looking out at the lights. "When I stepped off that riverboat in Eldorado Canyon, I was terrified. I had nowhere to turn, no idea what I was going to do. And then a lonely cowboy said, 'Turn to me always.'" Asher finished with a smile, pulling her close. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to trust me." "Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Rose replied. They returned home to find the children had driven Mrs. Fletcher to distraction, but everyone had survived. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm, the steady pulse of seasons and work and family. As the years passed, the children grew. James proved to have his father's way with animals and took to ranching naturally. Sarah was bookish like her mother and talked about becoming a teacher. Robert was still trying to figure out where he fit, torn between a dozen different interests. Rose taught at the school for many years, eventually becoming the head teacher. She was known for her patience and high standards, and many of the children in Eldorado Canyon learned their letters and numbers from her. It gave her a deep satisfaction, knowing she was making a difference in their lives. Asher expanded the ranch gradually, always careful not to overextend, and it became one of the most successful operations in the area. But he never lost sight of what mattered most. He always made time for his family, for quiet evenings with Rose, for teaching his sons to ride and rope, for listening to Sarah read her stories. Mrs. Fletcher passed away peacefully in her sleep when Rose was 42, and they buried her in the little cemetery on the hill overlooking the canyon. The whole town turned out for the funeral, a testament to how much she had meant to them all. Rose grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a chance when she had nothing, who had become the mother she had left behind in Boston. Time moved on, as it always does. The children grew into adults and began their own lives. James took over more of the ranch operations, eventually building a house for himself on the property. Sarah went away to school to become a teacher, then returned to take over Rose's position when she retired. Robert tried several different paths before finally finding his calling as a veterinarian, studying with a doctor in Carson City, and then returning to practice in the area. Rose and Asher grew older together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, seasoned by years of shared experiences, by weathering hardships and celebrating joys together. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family spreading out like the roots of a strong tree. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter when everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. On Rose's 65th birthday, the whole family came together for a celebration. As she looked around at all the faces, at the life she and Asher had built from nothing, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had gone home, she and Asher sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the past 43 years. "Do you ever think about that day you saw me hanging laundry?" Rose asked. "All the time," Asher said. "I still remember exactly how you looked, so determined and proud even though you were clearly exhausted. I knew right then that you were someone special." "I was terrified," Rose admitted. "I had no idea what I was going to do, how I was going to survive." "But you did survive," Asher said. "You did more than survive. You built a life, taught dozens of children, raised a family. You amazed me then, and you still amaze me now." "We did it together," Rose said, taking his hand. "I could not have done any of it without you. When I stepped off that riverboat with nowhere to turn, you gave me a place to belong. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Asher said. "More, maybe. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch but not really living. You taught me how to be happy again, how to open my heart again." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to indigo. The canyon walls caught the last light, glowing like embers, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "I love you," Rose said softly. "I love you so much it still takes my breath away sometimes." "I love you too," Asher replied. "Always have, always will." The years continued to pass, gently now, like a river flowing toward the sea. Asher and Rose remained active as long as they could, still riding out together on good days, still tending the garden, still welcoming family into their home. But gradually, age caught up with them. Asher passed first, on a warm spring morning when he was 76. He died peacefully in his sleep, Rose beside him. She held his hand and whispered goodbye to the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything for nearly 50 years. The grief was profound, but Rose found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together, in the memories that filled every corner of the ranch. She stayed in the house they had shared, unable to imagine living anywhere else. Rose lived 3 more years after Asher's passing, years filled with family and quiet contentment. She spent her days tending her garden, reading and telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the old days, about Eldorado Canyon when it was just a rough mining camp, about how she had met their great-grandfather. On her last evening, with her family gathered around her bed, she told them about stepping off the riverboat with nowhere to turn, about the lonely cowboy who had said, "Turn to me always," about the love that had shaped her entire life. "Remember," she told them, her voice weak but clear. "Remember that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best things. I was at my lowest point when I arrived here, but it became the best thing that ever happened to me. Do not be afraid of hard times. They teach you what you are made of, and they lead you to where you are meant to be." That night, Rose Zimmerman died peacefully, surrounded by the family she and Asher had created. They buried her beside him on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the whole community came to pay their respects to the woman who had become a beloved fixture of Eldorado Canyon. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The house was preserved as much as possible, filled with the furniture Rose and Asher had used, the books they had collected, the photographs that documented their life together. It became a touchstone for the family, a reminder of where they came from and the love that had founded their legacy. In time, Eldorado Canyon changed even more. The rough mining camp became a quiet town, then a tourist destination as people became interested in the history of the Old West. But those who knew the true stories, who had heard them passed down through families, remembered Rose and Asher Harding. They remembered the young widow who had arrived with nothing and built a life through determination and hard work. They remembered the lonely cowboy who had seen something special in her and offered her everything he had. They remembered a love story that had started in the most unlikely circumstances and endured through decades of hardship and joy. The Broken Arrow Ranch still stands, now run by James's great-grandson, a young man named Thomas who carries the family tradition forward. The cabin has been expanded many times, but the original structure remains at its heart, and the shelves Asher built for books still line one wall. On those shelves, carefully preserved, is a small leather journal that Rose kept throughout her life. In it, she documented her journey, from the terrifying day she stepped off the riverboat to the joy of her wedding, the births of her children, the countless small moments that made up a life well lived. The last entry, written just days before she died, reads simply, "I came west looking for escape and found a home. I married once for foolish reasons and once for love. I was given a second chance and I took it, and it made all the difference." To anyone who reads this, remember that it is never too late to start over, never too late to open your heart, never too late to turn toward love when it calls to you. Thank you, Asher, for being my home, my heart, my always. And so the story of Rose and Asher Harding lived on, not just in journals and family stories, but in the land they had worked, the community they had helped build, and the legacy of love they had left behind. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built something that would endure long after they were gone. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardships they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the love they had shared and the life they had created together. From a terrifying beginning on a dusty dock to a peaceful ending surrounded by family, theirs was a story of resilience, second chances, and the transformative power of love. The ranch still thrives, the family still gathers, and on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the canyon and paints the rocks in shades of gold and red, you can almost see them there, Rose and Asher sitting on the porch of their cabin, hands clasped, watching the beauty of the land they loved, together as they always were, together as they always would be, in memory and in the hearts of all who came after. Their story was one of many in the Wild West, but it was also unique, a testament to the courage it takes to start over, to trust again, to love again after loss. Rose had stepped off that riverboat with nowhere to turn, and Asher had said, "Turn to me always," and she had. And together they had built something beautiful and lasting. And that, in the end, was everything.